Welcome everyone to our first episode of R&D series on Marvel Snap. I'm Nathan, I'm one of the co-hosts here at Talk About Tatooine, and today we're going to look at the effectiveness of our custom deck, Khazar Counter. I played 100 games with this deck and took notes on every encounter. Let's break this down in some useful metrics and see how we did. First, let's go over the general overview of the deck. The average cost of the deck is 2.8 energy. This means that you will, on average, play about 7.5 cards per game for an average of 2.6 power per card. Now this deck has 5 ongoing cards, 4 of which add extra power to the deck. This starting cost to power breakdown starts low, but it climbs throughout the match. Let's go over the cards in the deck. We have several one-cost cards that are going to appear throughout this deck. This deck is built around getting many of these cards onto the field. A strategy that is commonly used with this deck is giving your opponent the illusion of control. Because this deck has 5 one-cost cards, it is easy to fill a location. However, due to cards like Nightcrawler and Squirrel Girl, you can fill a location and still have access to other lanes that might be restricted to play on, i.e. Luke's Bar, Altar of Death, Death's Domain, Crimson Cosmos, and Plunder Island. Recently, we did get a nerf to Sunspot. He did get pulled down to 0 power, so I may look for a replacement for him soon. However, he is useful in making your build more efficient or gaining that turn 6 power on a full lane for the win. Ant-Man is too good not to include in this deck. For 1 cost and for up to 4 power when this card is placed at a full location, this card climbs the power rankings. If draw order is in your favor, I have even gotten the +1 from Khazar, Captain America, and Blue Marvel, along with +2 from Spectrum, bringing him all the way up to 9 power. Ant-Man can really help you out in that turn 6 power play. We all have games where the luck of the draw was not on our side. This card can help fill those lanes and be buffed later on. Iceman. This dude is cool. Honestly, with a lucky Ice Blast, this guy can really throw a wrench in the opposing hand. If, for example, this only hits a 1-cost card, that means they're going to be able to play it on turn 2. It's not that much of a difference, but if we're hitting a 4 or a 5-cost card, that's going to delay their plays, especially in those ending 4, 5, and 6 turn games. Nightcrawler. What a fun guy. Movement is life. Being able to move this card around the board has won me many games. I think often players can miss him or forget he is there, and he can pull a fast one to reinforce another location or make room for another finishing play. Let's move on to our 2-cost cards. We only have one in this deck, and it's Armor. This card is here to counter Destroy Mechanic decks. I can't tell you how many times I have lost with this deck due to Killmonger. This can not only protect your own cards, but he's placed over the opposing Bucky Barnes, Nova, or Wolverine to frustrate the enemy. I love playing this and just watching the opponent immediately retreat when played over those cards. If you don't need to lock down a location or protect some of the cards, sometimes I'll opt to save Armor in favor of adding more 1-cost cards to the field. Now we've got one 3-cost card in this deck as well. Captain America boosts all other cards around him and can get on the field early, and be boosted by that Spectrum finisher. This is a solid card overall in this lineup. This deck relies heavily on the volume of cards to get the most benefit from all those ongoing abilities. Captain America really comes in to save the day. Now we get into those turn 4 cards. Khazar, this is the namesake of the deck. I love playing this card to give my lanes that extra boost. We also see Enchantress. A strong counter to this deck is the vanilla deck. This is what I call Patriot-led decks. Lots of vanilla cards, or cards with no abilities. With all those extra stacking boosts, you can put a lot of power output onto those lanes. Play Enchantress over Patriot, game over. This can also help with the Mystique or Onslaught follow-up. You might even get lucky and hit their Blue Marvel too. Shang-Chi is one of my favorite counters to play. The beauty of this deck is that it works on averages. Truly, this deck can reliably put out between 12 and 16 power on at least 2 lanes. Play your cards right, and often this is all you need to win. However, big power cards can swing a location away from you. Even the odds with 10 Rings of Fury. Moving on to our 5-cost category, Blue Marvel is honestly one of my favorite cards. Being able to buff all of your cards is huge. This allows you to keep pumping power into locations even after you fill them, forcing your opponent to catch up. This gives you control of the match and honestly can play many different games into your favor. Then we move into the finisher. 1 6-card cost finishes up the lineup here, and we've got Spectrum. Spectrum operates on the same wavelength as Blue Marvel, adding power to full lanes, power stacking, whatever you want to call it. Keep in mind that if you don't have enough cards in the field, it can be better to forego Spectrum, a play your opponent might anticipate, and fill the lanes instead. 6 power goes a long way with this deck. This deck works because of its counters. Honestly, I could get rid of Enchantress and Shang-Chi and other cards to the field but the countering ability seems to outweigh those options. Shang-Chi really helps play down those power decks. This is best used when you can either yield advantage to your opponent as a preventative kill, i.e. after Shuri is played, or a turn is skipped for She-Hulk or Infinite. You can also use Shang-Chi when advantage is present. Just keep in mind that Enchantress in this deck is a double-edged sword. It's useful for Patriot combos, but it can knock out cards we have in our possession. That includes Ant-Man, Captain America, Khazar, and Blue Marvel. Armor's a really fun one to keep around. Blocking locations so that you can play on them, and blocking the destroy mechanics, super fun. Always love winning that way. Let's get into the deck stats here, guys. With this deck, over 100 games, we won 51 games out of 100 for a 51% win rate. Our average cubes were 0.41. That comes out to a total of 41 cubes across 100 games. Similar deck performances you guys might find on snapfan.io are the Kazoo archetype. This deck archetype wins 57.55% of the time, with a 6% increase and a 0.46 average cubes, putting it at 0.05 average increase. With a win percent that close, it's really about how you play the opponent and knowing when to back out. If you guys do a search for a Khazar counter, you guys will find this deck on SnapFan, the link to which will be in the description of this video. Now, as we were going through, we compiled a lot of data. Locations that play really well with this deck are as follows. We got to see Wakanda in 4 different games out of 100, and we won 3 out of those 4 games. We saw Elysium quite a few times, 7 appearances total, with a 5 out of 7 win rate. Another location that kind of surprised me was Kunlun. We saw this location 5 times and won 4 out of those 5 matches. This really only boosts Nightcrawler in this situation, but we seemed to do well when this one came around. Interestingly enough, we had many locations that did not play well with this deck. A big surprise of mine was Onslaught Citadel. If you guys aren't familiar with Onslaught Citadel, this doubles the effect of all ongoing cards at this location. Out of the 6 games that appeared playing this deck, every single one of them was a loss. This was really surprising to me at first, but let's break down what happened. The reason these games resulted in losses was an inability to counter. Oftentimes, I would play my amplifier cards, these are Khazar, Blue Marvel, at this location, and so would my enemy. To counter them with Enchantress would mean to cut off my own power supply. This resulted in 4 retreats and 2 losses, a total loss of -8 cubes. Another hard location to win was Sokovia. I saw this location 5 times and only won a single game. And this was only because that was against a destroy mechanic deck and it lost its Killmonger turn 1 from the same location. A huge boon for me. The other 4 games resulted in me losing cards that either hurt my turn order, my power output, or my counters. This is a brutal location against this deck. Other notable locations that played poorly with the Khazar counter was Nowhere with a 0 out of 3 record, Monster Island also 0 out of 3, Bifrost winning 1 out of 4, Big House 1 out of 4, and Stark Tower 1 out of 4 as well. Let's do a deck breakdown of the most common decks we saw played against me. In that number 1 spot, we saw many different mixed decks. Now, mixed decks are just going to be decks we have just with standard classifications that don't necessarily fit any one archetype. We saw this type of deck come out 33 times. The second most common deck we saw was destroy mechanic decks. We saw this 15 times. In third place, we saw 12 different Wong/Odin decks really doubling down on that on-reveal abilities. After that, in 4th place, we saw a Patriot deck 7 different times. And tied for 5th and 6th, we saw 6 discard decks and 6 collector-based decks as well. These are cards that often will add cards to your hand and play many cards back onto the field as well. You guys are going to find this deck under Khazar counter. You guys can search that and you guys will be able to find it. These videos take a lot of time to produce, edit, write, and do all that fun stuff. So make sure if you guys did like the video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of these other research and development videos. And we also have a Patreon as well. That way, if you guys get value out of what we put out, you guys consider putting some value back in. That's going to support us and all the different projects we do so that we can come out with bigger and better content for you, the viewer. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Close your eyes.